there's nothing new under the sun in terms of drugs. There's always, even as we are speaking now, there is a mad scientist trying to concoct some stuff together to get people high. Why? It's because there's a demand. And we're talking about, if you have a demand for anything, there's a lot of people that's going to try to make money and supply you with your demand. Is there a demand for cars, of a certain type of car? Well, you better believe that somebody's going to be building those cars in record pace to make sure that the demand doesn't exceed the supply. You always need a supply to support the demand. And so as we look at this trend and these problems that's coming up, we have things like we call internet drug shopping. I was surprised just the other day, not the other day, this has been some time ago, is that somebody said, well, you can get any drug you want off the internet. And so I went on the internet to see. And so I started a few clicking. I clicked in opiates, and a whole bunch of drugs popped up on the screen. And then a person who, then they had suppliers who sold those particular drugs. And I'm thinking, is this legal? And obviously it's legal, because one of the things that I realized early on in my days in using opiate type drugs, people, regulations and the government doesn't catch up with these things until later on, until they become a serious problem. For instance, cough syrup is one of the things in our day, which was opiate-based Robitussin AC. When I first got introduced to this particular drug, we would walk right into the drugstore, buy it off, just a whole bunch of them. I remember I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, and some guy, when we was in Job Corps together, he grabbed a whole bunch of those drugs and went to the cashier, and they paid for them. Well, next week we came, they was put behind the counter. We had to sign for them. But see, then they kept hiding them, and then pretty soon it became regulated that you had to have a prescription. And so as people, as we begin to abuse drugs throughout the history, we will find out about this later on as we do this presentation, you'll notice that the regulations are way behind the trends that are taking place even today. And I want to try to set the table for Dr. Anderson and Karen, because they're going to do a presentation that talks about some of the trends. And of course, Dr. Anderson is going to actually talk about some of the effects that these drugs have on the brain. But I want to do one demonstration that I always do to try to get you to understand a little bit about what we're talking about here. My drawing might not be that good. This is a tip of an iceberg. And what happened, let's liken the tip of the iceberg as the actual drug that's being used. And all of this stuff here is stuff that support the tip. We all know that you can chip this tip away, but unless we do something about this, it'll continue to come back over and over again. In fact, this is exactly what happened in the criminal justice system. When a person is involved in drugs, because the rules say no drugs and there's none around, what happens is that a lot of the behavior begin to surface from up here, and eventually any opportunity that they get, they will relapse and use again. So as we continue to take this out, one of the programs that really understand this better than a lot of programs is the 12 steps. If you look at the 12 steps, they only mention the drugs once. Everything else is about this stuff underneath it. Relationships, making amends, character defects, all of these other things. This is what's holding this thing up, because without treatment, these things will continue to come up over and over again. I once talked to a warden from a major prison, and he told me that he can accurately tell every person, he can accurately identify every person that leaves his facility that will eventually relapse and the ones that might make it. And I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, first of all, if a person come into this institution, and he didn't say this, he didn't have this illustration, and never do anything about what brought them there in the first place, they would eventually reoffend and come back. I said, well, kind of explain that a little bit to me. And so he told me that here's a guy that comes in, and he had the drugs as a problem. He never used drugs while he was incarcerated, but he never did anything about this, the behaviors and everything else that is associated with the addiction. And so once he got out, he was free to reoffend. And I said, why do you think that he didn't do anything about what happened, about the problem that when he came in, why do you think he didn't do anything about it? He said, because the same behavior, like, you know, he was still doing the slick stuff in the institution, he was getting DRs, and he was still demonstrating that same negative behavior. So it kind of got us to looking at some of the stuff here. And this is what the TC does. But some of the damage that take place, I used to be very hard on drugs. I had a statement that I still make that statement, I still believe it, that I can put a pile of drugs right here and it's not going to jump up in anybody's nose or go into their veins for them to use it. It's a choice. And I still believe that. However, after this cycle has gone on for a long period of time, it becomes very extremely difficult because of all the damages in the brain and all the sickness that associated that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that basically brings this back up over and over again because the person continued to use, and in spite of the fact that they are not using. It's kind of weird, but it set them up to continue to use once they leave. So this illustration to me is a very powerful illustration. The other illustration that I think I want to talk about is that there's 4 genetically influenced traits that increase the likelihood that a person will become chemical dependency, will get involved in chemical dependence. First, we call it the biological reinforcement. That's when a person starts experiencing such a positive move in personality change as a result of using drugs. They feel good, and they don't know why, but somehow or another they're genetically predisposed to alcohol or drugs or chemical dependency of whatever type. And so they develop what we call number 2 is a high tolerance, heavy use with one intoxication. They can hold what you call hold their liquor. I used to wonder why I was a designated driver even though I drunk more than anybody else. Well, let me back up a little bit because I need to give you a little history about myself. My father was an alcoholic. I lost 6 brothers as a result of chemical dependency, dead before the age of 40. So I'm talking firsthand. I know that the disease exists in my family. And so what happened is that some things that was taking place in my life I didn't understand is that I was a designated driver, but I was drinking more than anybody else. So that should have been a clue. The other clue is that there's a hangover resistance. You have minimal illness the day after you use. Now I was up raring to go, ready to go after drinking. All my buddies, even though they drink less, they were still out cold. They still was having problems trying to get themselves up again for the next day. Well, I was up again for the next day and ready to go. But one thing I didn't know, which was 4, is called brain damage sensitivity. Brain damage that's dysfunction builds up with regular use, particularly with a person who is genetically predisposed to alcoholism or drug addiction. What the damage is being more prevalent in that person than the person who are not. So this is the big difference when we talk about this. See, we have to understand that chemical dependency is a biopsychosocial spiritual disease. It's like a chain reaction of things that take place. When I say brain dysfunction, it's caused by addiction used in a person who is genetically predisposed. But then you talk about psycho, which is a personality change as a result of the problems with the dysfunctional cause in the brain as a result of a person used. Then it changes the person's personality, and they begin to act differently. And then the social is connected to that. Social problems caused by the personality change in the relationships, because you're thinking differently, you're associating with different people, and so your relationship with others are severely damaged. And then I added this because nobody seemed to recognize this portion, is the spiritual, God, the higher power. There's a sense of guilt when you have this relationship with other people and you're taking from people. You're being a taker and not a giver, and all of this personality, this drug change as a result of the brain damage chemically to your brain, which create a kind of a psychological, the way you think, you begin to think differently. And then as you think differently, your relationship with other people changes, because you no longer have a positive relationship with people in a healthy way. It's dysfunctional. And then as a result of that, there is a spiritual issue that the lifestyle consciousness of moral goodness. And basically, if you understand this very properly, it's the first to leave, but it's the last to return. Now, when I say first to leave, a person begins to compromise their value system, their morals, when they start using. And then as they compromise that, all of these other things is becoming more prevalent in terms of the damage in their lives. The physical, they use more, they think about using more, they socialize, the social issues are much different and more problematic. And so those are some things that happen, but the physical is the first to return, but it's the last to leave. The physical part, a person don't realize that they need any help or any problems until they start falling apart physically, health-wise. They lose weight, no sleep, a lot of damage is taking place, and so pretty soon it becomes obvious to not only yourself but everybody else that there's some serious issues with the physical person, this person physically. However, it is the first to return. Our clients always bounce back physically before they bounce back spiritually. Remember, the spiritual is the first to leave, but last to return. And the physical is the last to leave, but the first to return. So it gives a person a kind of a false sense of security, thinking that I'm okay, I pumped iron and I'm getting sleep and pumped up now, I feel really good about myself. And they begin to think that everything is okay. Because physically, as you look at that person, he's gained 50 pounds. He's no longer 132 like when he got in that came there. Now he's weighing about 180 pounds and he's healthy looking. He's getting his sleep. How many people know that a crack addict, and I was surprised when I heard this, a crack addict can stay up to over 9 days and nights straight without any sleep. One of the things that I noticed in the addiction process is that when you're talking about cocaine, you're talking about the neurotransmitter called, which the doctor would talk more about this later, called dopamine. Well, dopamine deals with our pleasure center. And our pleasure center deal with eating, sleeping, and sex. These are the main areas in which you deal with. It gives you credit for eating. When you do cocaine, you get credit for eating when you didn't eat. I mean, here's a person who gets to survive off a candy bar for 2 days, just a candy bar. They give you credit for sleeping when you didn't sleep. Here's a person up all night, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nights in a row without any sleep. unheard of, isn't it? Just think of all the damage that's being done. And then at first it becomes an aphrodisiac, but then later it becomes the sex itself. That's why no wonder you call it the girl. Everybody called the cocaine the girl because it becomes to them like a companion. And so they call it, you get credit for doing things that you didn't do. And so this is kind of the mystery around some of the neurotransmitters that we have that deals with us on an everyday basis. And the other demonstration that I want to do here is that this is everything that we're going to do is going to be predicated on this. I discovered this demonstration many years ago, and I called this life. This is life. We call this L-I-F-E. This is life. In life, and this is euphoria. And this is depression. In life, we don't go too far off the chart. We have some good times, we feel good, but we have this is normal life here. We say normal, whatever you identify normal. We have some ups and downs, and we go like this. We go through life like this here. Not too far off the normal pace, but not too far out up there either. The only time we really go up here is that if you win the lottery, you experience this euphoria. Wow, I won the lottery. And you feel really good. How many people won the $2 million lottery that been up here before? I don't see any hands, so there's not many people who go up there. But what happens that when a person starts using stuff like cocaine or any drugs, this pattern goes to anybody. They experience this euphoria, but then we know what goes up must come down. And it goes down here into a depression area, but then you don't like it down there. So you go and get high again, and you go back up, and then you go back down, go back up, and back down, and back up, and back down, back up, and down, and down, and down. Anybody see something? What happened is that your highs become lower, and your lows become lower. So pretty soon, the person is only using just to be a normal person. I can identify with this. This is very true. Now, this might take anywhere from, this could take a very short period of time. This could be 7 days, particularly some of the very fast addicting drugs. But this could take place over several years. But it will happen. This is how addiction looks in terms of ups and downs. But as they talk about this in a few minutes, they're going to talk about how a person is always trying to chase, and he's trying to get back up here. It's a chase that's probably going to take place for the rest of their life. They never get back up there again. That euphoric feeling that made them feel so good. I often talk about the guy who was so contradictory. He was using drugs, but he would be so nice to people. And basically he would walk when the guy's using, when that dopamine is really clicking in that pleasure center, you feel so nice. He would walk the old lady across the street and everything, and then 2 seconds later he's snatching her purse. But he says, feels so good. And it's this sensation that a person is chasing. I often call it, what I call, is how our brain is designed. Our brain is designed in such a way that we avoid pain and seek pleasure. That's how we are wired. Everybody in here is wired that way. You want to avoid pain and you want to seek pleasure. And so if you're looking at this thing here, what you see is that it's important. It's absolutely essential that we get early intervention. If we don't get early intervention, by the time a person get here, it won't be too late, but it will be very difficult for that person to make that decision when this cocaine is here on this table and make that choice to use it, which we talked about earlier. This is a very difficult cycle here, because it cycles a person to a point where the sickness here, all of this stuff begin to increase. By the time a person get here, there's so much stuff down here underneath that iceberg that this iceberg become bigger, larger, and and this continue to come up and pop up over and over again. They call this relapse. And so this is a very serious disease that we're talking about, that we want to get your attention. And I wanted to kind of set the table so that when Dr. Anderson come up, he'll be able to give you some pieces that are missing from this illustration.